This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to today's Talk Business and Politics Daily. I'm Roby Brock. It's Monday. That means we are talking to the legendary John Brummett. You're legendary now. I'm putting you in legendary column.
I'd like to think so. Are you the official anointer of those who are legendary?
I am. We will talk about other legendary people at some other time, but not today. Let's get to politics and what's happening. Let's go national first.
Okay.
Donald Trump speaking to the governors, including, I think, our very own Asa Hutchinson today. He has decided that health care reform may be a little more complicated than he first figured. Are you surprised?
Well, so far today, Donald Trump has had a pretty good day. He has only said this one thing that I know of that is absolutely outrageous. But what he said today that was absolutely outrageous is, yes, we're coming with health care reform. It's going to be great, but, quote, nobody knew that health care was going to be so complicated. I think people who were keeping up, people who were fair-minded, people who understood the issue, people who were concerned about it, knew it was going to be very complicated. In fact, last week in these two chairs, you and I started it, but you agreed. We doubted whether this could be done in a year or two, considering the complications of it by policy and the politics of it because of the schisms with the Republicans over exactly how you repeal and how you replace. So that's why I had to guffaw. But I guess the idea is if Donald Trump has discovered it is only now that it is a complicated issue, a complex issue, then everybody else has only also discovered just now that it is
at least
complex.
His base.
But it is unbelievably complicated because it affects Medicare, Medicaid, state budgets, federal budgets, exchanges, the coverages,
the private sector insurance companies,
and not even to mention the people who provide the insurance.
Code.
All of that,
yeah.
all of that.
It is.
And I will be surprised if we get anything in a year.
So I would still say this, in talking to a number of different congressional leaders, House and Senate side, nationally and here in the state, you get a different answer from every single one of them about what's going to happen. Senator Cotton saying, we will repeal it, but maybe we will take up to 3 years to replace it in some sort of phases. So there's certainty in the market.
That's actually
I'm cutting through the clutter there, but yeah, that was the gist of it. But I have heard from others that we're going to tweak around the edges. I've heard from others that are, John Boehner, former Speaker of the House, said they're not going to undo Obamacare.
Have you noticed have you seen his interviews with Boehner when it turns out, no wonder the Tea Party Republicans couldn't stand him. He talks like a Democrat. But he's a realist and he can tell the truth now. He said they're not going to repeal and replace this. They're going to revise a little what we have, which is what Hillary Clinton said we ought to do, which is the thing that's wrong with Obamacare is we can't afford it. People can't afford it. The premiums are too expensive. How do we go about controlling costs and extending coverage within the framework of what we have? But there is a significant coalition of House Republicans especially who say who owe their elections to repealing Obamacare. And I think the policy, as difficult as it is no more difficult than the Republican politics. And what Donald Trump says tomorrow night about it in his State of the Union, if anything, will be most interesting.
Well, let's turn to that because I did want to get you to give me your preview of the State of the Union address. Do you think...
You know how plugged in I am.
Well, I know you got the bat phone direct line there. You're probably the reason that all those leaks are coming out there that they're leaking about.
I would love to be. I would love to take credit for that.
The State of the Union address, it will be his first. Will we see more rhetoric that we have seen lately, like from CPAC and his press conference, or do you think we see a teleprompter-controlled, measured Donald Trump before the members of Congress tomorrow night?
The short, honest answer is I don't know. But it is a most interesting question because what we have seen thus far from this president in terms of his major communications, from his inaugural address to his executive orders, to his big 77-minute news conference, to his speech at CPAC last week, it's been red meat for the base, and it seems to come straight from the Bannon theory of what this presidency is supposed to be about and what we ought to be saying. As destructive as I think that's been, you could say that tactically it makes some sense to begin your presidency by emphasizing the things you can do the most easily that solidifies your base. The time to make a pivot to a more modulated governing rhetoric would be when you have to turn to the legislature, the Congress, and talk about what you're going to do. But that would be conventional, and we've seen nothing conventional from Trump to this point. But it will, I don't know the answer to your question, but the main reason to watch tomorrow night is to see what the answer is. Is he going to stand before Congress and the nation and give us this same harsh rhetoric about and name calling of all of his detractors and critics, or is he going to actually, in terms of health care, outline principles? I know this is difficult. It's going to take some time, and talk logically about health care reform and what the foundation of it ought to be. Will he do that? It's hard to imagine because we haven't seen that from him. But it's the time for it, and if he doesn't pivot to a bit of conventionality tomorrow night, I don't think he's going to.
Yeah. Well, since you're afraid to take a position on this,
well, go ahead. I'm not afraid to take a position. I don't know. The position I'm taking is I don't know, and the other position is you don't know either. Well, but you go ahead.
But I'm going to go ahead and lay it out there so that next week we can see who was right and who was wrong. I think he goes more red meat to the base again, and I think that what he is doing currently is just cementing his place with his base, so that they are loyal to a fault and they will never, ever, ever leave him. Although I think they may already be there. You don't have to worry about re-election for another couple of years. So why not wait and pivot when there's enough time for people to say, he used to be red meat to the base, but look at him now. He's changed. He's moderated a little bit. It's too early for him to do that now. I think that tactically he stays with the red meat to the base.
I was thinking about how he has already received a little criticism because he seems to be sensitive to the dreamers, to the immigrant children who were born here. And I read a piece just today or yesterday that's causing him some trouble on the right. So as long as he has trouble on the right, perhaps you're right. He just continues to try to counter. But it will be remember, Clinton, even Bush, even though Bush once went with the axis of evil and went very rhetorically strong, they're normally outlines of legislation. But this is not a normal time or a normal presidency.
All right, we'll compare notes next week on this particular subject.
Yeah, but just for the record, you took a position and I didn't, so I can't be wrong.
Let's take a commercial break.
Right.
We're going to come back and talk about some things happening in state politics that include the federal elected officials. I'm Roby Brock. I'm with John Brummett. We're back right after this.
Circuits turn on the lights by making a connection, by closing the loop. At Entergy, we believe our economy is circular too. What you put in comes back. So we invest billions in new infrastructure, which helps attract new industry, which helps create new jobs. We partner with local communities to electrify the economy. And together, we power life. Entergy.
When was the last time you felt free? It's time to uncover that feeling again with the compassion of a cross and shield, accepted by over 90% of doctors and specialists, and the power of a card that opens doors in all 50 states, giving you the freedom to love, to dream, to dance like no one is watching. Arkansas Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Live fearless.
And welcome back to Talk Business and Politics Daily. I'm with John Brummett of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Let's talk about the town hall that Tom Cotton had last week. Steve Womack had one up in Northwest Arkansas. We didn't see any others in public, except for one that you were at, and there were no elected officials.
There were cardboard cutouts of French Hill, John Bozeman, and Tom Cotton.
Now, so why were you there, and who was this group that pulled that town hall
Well, you know,
together?
this whole indivisible movement, indivisible groups are in geographic areas of the country. There is one called Central Arkansas Indivisible or Indivisible Central Arkansas, I don't know which. And they wanted to do a get-together and have a meeting and call it a town hall and invite the two senators and French Hill, none of whom bothered to come, not only not to come, but to give them much of a straight answer. They just assumed they weren't going to be there. So they put together what they called a missing persons rally, and needing some speakers, they invited 4 or 5 people to push back against certain elements of the Trump outrage. And
you were one of them?
Well, you understand that he has declared war on the mainstream media and on, I would say, on the First Amendment and on the use of undisclosed sources, and declared all of us fake news. And I actually went first and spoke for 10 or 15 minutes.
What was your advice?
My advice?
And what did you say?
My advice was to hug a newspaper reporter and fend off the groping of the preposterous second-place president. That was my advice. It also was, the President of the United States has called newspaper reporters, news media reporters, enemy of the people. And then I gave an outline of a real case in which the Associated Press got a document from inside the Homeland Security Department that said that this draft document said that we did not need to impose this travel ban on these 7 countries. We'd never had a terrorist incident from there. We would cause ourselves more trouble than we could possibly do ourselves any good, and that the White House pushed back against it. And I said that's because they didn't control the news. It was news from the government that the Associated Press, a cooperative of the mainstream media, ferreted out. And in that scenario, your friend is the Associated Press, not the President of the United States, because he could not control the news. He is not like Louis XIV, the state. He is an employee of the people. So you just heard my remarks.
Well, for those who weren't there, that was what John Brummett said. So if you missed it on Sunday.
It was well received.
I'm sure it was.
Yes.
I'm sure it was. You were in a room full of John Brummett readers too, probably.
There seemed to be a few there. All of them were there in one place.
Let's talk about the fallout from these town halls. Does Tom Cotton, Steve Womack, do they get credit for standing in front of folks and fielding questions and delivering their responses to the folks that don't show up? Do they get some sort of political payback as a result of not being there? No? No,
there's nobody. No, none of our established Republican politicians dare worry about a thing. Tom Cotton is editorially praised by my newspaper and others. Is just getting credit. He stood up there and he took it, and he was polite and he was patient. My attack is, yeah, that's true, and I do give him credit. He didn't answer any of the questions, partly because he was shouted over, but even when you could hear him, he was evasive. Womack gets credit, and the ones yesterday who didn't show up, their supporters, the 50-60% loyal supporters, are thinking, well, there's just a set-up deal, a bunch of room full of crazy liberals.
Senator Marco Rubio said these are just photo ops for people to scream at me.
Right, right. Also known as constituents, but there's no political harm. If anything, there's a little bit political gain for Republicans from this. The issue is whether this indivisible movement amounts to anything. Does it sustain? Does it grow and form a coalition and begin to influence left of center politics? Not here so much, maybe some here, but nationally. And that's whether it will be an inverse of the Tea Party.
Yeah.
That's what is interesting.
Kind of remains to be seen.
And
I am curious if the indivisible movement spawns some potential candidates for Democratic office, even at the local level, just because I think
that's what the Tea Party
there
did.
are a lot of faces and voices that I have not seen before active in politics that have come out as a result of this.
Right.
Last question for you. Let's talk about the Supreme Court ruled we now have the green light for state executions to carry forward. Governor Asa Hutchinson has set 8 execution dates, all in April. However, only 2 of the 3 drugs needed for the cocktail to carry out these executions are within expiration period. So the Department of Corrections says we will move forward when appropriate. Will these executions take place in April?
You wouldn't think so. Not that statement, we will move forward when appropriate, seems to mean, yes, the governor has set a date and we'll meet that date, but right now we can't do much because we don't have all the ingredients for the cocktail that we use, and we can't get them, and I'm assuming when appropriate means when and if we can get the drug, which may prove difficult because of the, particularly, like the European pharmaceutical industry and its aversion to participating in what it views as sort of a primitive American process or American policy. Actually, Asa Hutchinson told me that when he's in Europe talking to industrial prospects, he hears about the transgender stuff. You know, people worry about disapprovingly by European industrialists and economic leaders. But he said also about they hear about the death penalty. They think there's something wrong with this part of the country where we do that so much. So it's I don't know where they'll find it, where they'll get it, but I do know politically in Arkansas, If you get a chance to set an execution date and carry one out, you do so.
Yep.
That's the public sentiment.
All right. He's John Brummett with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Read him 4 times a week.
You know, you can read me 3 times a week in the paper and once online only.
I screw that up every week.
Well,
you know?
I don't. It's okay.
It's
I just
confusing.
appreciate your effort.
You need to be 7 days a week.
Tomorrow's column will be about the missing persons town hall,
Okay.
which I just told
Which
you.
we got the preview
I gave you the
of.
whole scenario
All
earlier.
right. John Brummett, thank you so
All
much.
right, thank you.
All right. That's all for today's Talk Business and Politics Daily. I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for watching.